All right, so what we're going to talk about today is calculating an ROI, a change ROI. And what we want to be able to do is think through both the general want to think through how to handle working with a business owner who's driving the particular effort that we're working in, and then also how do we present that ROI as something that's going to be really, if we can, bulletproof. And I think we're shooting for bulletproof from the point of view of an analyst. So we're going to talk about a few things as we go through this. And first, we'll talk about this business case idea itself. How are business cases used? What does that really mean? And then get into the metrics and how do we actually measure an ROI and keep it in front of us. And we'll finish up with just a little bit around how do you tell the story. So making sure that it stays a persuasive argument as we go through.
So before we jump into the material, I wanted to share a little bit about why, how we came to this webinar and why we decided to share this information. And it has to do with my background as a change practitioner. Most of my change work in my career took place working for a highly skeptical and highly analytical organization called Capital One. And when I joined the company, they had 5,000 employees, and when I left, they had 50,000 employees, and that alone made it a great change playground. During my time there, they always hired analysts. So as a change professional, it was my job to help this person understand what the change work was and its relevance to the success of an initiative that they were leading. So often this question came up from the folks that I worked for and with: what is the value of my investment in resources and time in change management? And so that started my interest in answering the question. And then years later, when I started to connect with professionals outside of my employer, they had the same question. And then later, when I became more involved in ACMP, we heard this a lot from members. So obviously this question persisted. And so Ed is actually one of the analysts that I work with. He was one of the leaders of these major change initiatives. And he also has his PhD in system modeling and analysis. So he's one of those data scientists you hear about. And so what's great about that from my perspective is that we have collaborated to help create the answer, identify the answer. My perspective, it comes from my perspective as a change professional and Ed's perspective as an executive leader and analyst. And so that's what we're going to share with you today. And it's our hope that you will be able to use this approach to gain credibility with the people you work with that have this question: what's the return on investment for change management? So that's why we've created this, and that's why we're sharing this today. So as Ed said, thank you for joining.
Okay, great. Thanks, Roxanne. Let's talk about the business case part of that. So how does this really show up, and how do we want to make all that work? And so when we think about a business case, think about it in terms of, is a business case fact, or is it this kind of weird fantasy thing? And I think it's really better to think about a business case as a prediction. It's really your best understanding that the organization has at the time, and that is going to change, right? New information is going to come along, or there's going to be other impacts that will happen. Company decides to do a merger, or there are other projects that come in and start to have an impact on the business case for the thing that you're working on. So I think organizations need to update it as new information arrives, because if you don't do that, then really what you're doing is checking how good are you at predicting the future. Not really, are you putting together a tool that's going to help you to be able to manage what's going on within this particular project or effort that you're doing. So what's it for? Well, we're going to pull all these different components in. And so this is kind of typical of what I think of as a good business case. So there's a summary that's put together that gives you a basic description, a problem statement that is telling you more deeply what's going on. And then C is really where you get the guts of what's going on in the business case. And that's the analysis. It's where the data is presented and where the analysis is of what the impact is going to be. And this is where I think the change ROI is going to come into play. It's going to wrap it around this. I'm going to show you more specifically how to think about that. And then lastly, you get the solution. So we've analyzed it. Now here's our solution. When that solution involves humans having to go do something, then understanding what the change ROI is, that's when that's gonna matter. And we'll show you more about what we really mean by that. So when I think about a business case and maybe a different definition, this is a good working definition. I think of a business case as a justification for a proposed initiative that's based on its expected benefit and must be updated as new information arrives to be valid, be a valid measure of success. Another piece to go with that is the definition of change management, which comes out of the standard for change management. So,
right. So the standard for change management, I'll hold it up here. This is a definition out of the standard. And you can see that it's about applying a structured approach to manage a transition to achieve an expected benefit. So there's obviously a connection to the change work and achieving the business case.
So I think it's important to keep both of these in mind, especially when we're going to get to a change ROI. Like, really, this gets to what are we measuring exactly? And so I want to pay attention to both of these definitions. Okay, so let's get into it. So let's talk about a return on investment and how to actually go about measuring a change ROI. And so we're going to get right to it. Here's the equation, or this is the equation that we would suggest you guys could use to do that. So the first piece of this is to look at the business case as written, and then look at the value of the initiative that is delivered by people, by humans. And the distinction here is that it can't include things that are going to be around upgrades to software where you get a discount in the licensing, right? So that by itself is not human generated value. It's going to be the value with the people interacting with the software. So I'm just suggesting that we look at that business case and separate those out because it's going to be more compelling. I mean, to be frank, somebody like me is going to look at that and go, hey, you can't count that because that's not driven by a change management effort. We get that value just by executing the license. So you want to pay attention to those. And then once you have that, now you want to look at what of that value is going to come from people doing something differently. And a potentially very easy way to think about it is if you kicked off an email, sent it out to everyone, and they all did what you wanted to do and adopted the change exactly as you intended them, well, then you don't need change management and there's no value to you doing any change management effort. But if that is not true, and I would say in most cases that is not true, then there's going to be some value for the change management. And so what you want to think about is what is the probability that people are going to do what you need them to do without doing any change management. So you can think of that in two ways. That might be a general sort of, well, we got a 50-50 shot at getting everybody to do it. Or you can think about it, well, maybe I'll only get 30% of the people will actually adopt the way that I would want them to adopt. And the other 70%, well, they might be confused or know where to go or you know, that kind of a thing. So you can go and figure out what that probability is. There's a quick question here about is the probability expressed as a decimal? Yes. And I would just say always use probabilities as a decimal because it's confusing when you stick that little percentage sign on, or people get confused. So easier to think about it as a decimal. So it should be a number between 0 and 1, just to be super clear about it. And so we're trying to capture that bit of the probability that is, or that bit of the business case that's only associated with humans. And then we want to subtract out whatever cost we're going to spend to go do it. So that's the cost of you as an individual, all the other people that are engaged. Could be the cost of anything else that you're doing that's associated with what's going on. You buy supplies, hold a meeting, put up banners, whatever. Just add all those costs all in, and then whatever's left over That's going to be your return. A lot of times people like to think about return on investment as something that's done as a decimal or as a percentage. So you can take the very same things and just rearrange them. If you do it like this, now you have a percentage, right? So here's the percentage return or the factor return that I'm going to get. It's the same stuff. I'm just rearranging the term so that you can express it as a percentage. And that's what your return on investment is going to be. So that is a nice high level way to look at it. Let's go now and maybe break down into some of the factors a little bit more so we really kind of understand what all of those are. So number one, the business case value. So again, this is about the people. So I'm going to want to make sure that we're paying attention to that. And if there's no business case, which happens, I'm sure you guys have experienced that, you can do it as a qualitative measure. So try and base it on something that is similar. And then work with whoever the business owner is that would own that business case, that is responsible for delivering the value, and have them express back to you what they think the value was of the previous effort that was there. And then you can use that as a proxy, even if you're just getting close. Maybe it's a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. You can kind of walk your way through all of those to figure out what's going on. The probability of success, how likely is the adoption of the change if you just send an email? That's just a rule of thumb way that we like to think about it, because it seems to make it easier, and it can be a percentage of the people or a likelihood that folks are going to do it. And then all in on the costs, right? So you need to be really thorough about this so that you don't have some hard-nosed analysts coming in and going, oh, well, you're not including everything, or that's not free. You want to have all those in there so that it's truly bulletproof. All right, so let's look at an example. So again, starting with a business case value. So a simple business case, it's got 3 elements to it. We're doing a software change out, and we're going to reduce the licensing costs. We're going to have a increase in sales inquiries, and we're going to close more sales, and that's the value that we get out of it. So in these 3, you can only use number 2 and number 3 as part of this calculation. You can't use number 1 because the reduction in the licensing cost comes from just signing the contract. Now, to be sure, you're not getting any business value out of that, but you don't get that value as a result of how people are interacting with the system. You only get that value as you work your way through and make all of this happen. So we only want to pay attention to that stuff that's connected to people. And then we want to look at next the probability of change success. So with the CRM system, what's the likelihood that we are going to get everyone to adopt? And so just for this case, I'm going to say 70%. Those of you that have ever done this before already know that 70% is way too high. There's no way you're implementing a new CRM and going to get 70% adoption by doing nothing. But just for the purposes of illustrating all of this, that's what we're going to look at. And then we'll look at the costs of actually doing the change. So cost for the change manager, if you have a specific project manager or part of a project manager for the change, meetings, other material, other people that are engaged, all that. We're going to throw it all together. And let's say in this case, we end up with 890,000. Just making all these up for illustrative purposes. All right, so let's take all those then and just stick them back into this very same setup that we had before. So if we had 4.4 million, remember just the 2 pieces that mattered, we're working off of 70%. We got nearly $1 million in costs. Our return on investment is going to be 430,000. If you want to be super safe, you might even consider cutting that in half and saying, okay, this is what I got, and I'm just going to put a 50% factor on it. Now the return on investment's still over 200,000. It doesn't matter, because if you get a positive ROI, then it's valuable. When you're thinking about the change, you're just trying to think about, are you going to actually enable getting the business value that you're trying to achieve? If you have a positive ROI, then that's worth doing. Now, if there's multiple change initiatives and you can only get to apply change management to a certain number of them, okay, now you could go about comparing the ROIs and decide where you want to deploy people who are your change managers. I think you got another problem, which is if you got initiatives that require change management and you're not going to pay money to go take care of those, and you're going to have failures, and that's probably a mistake. But that's a way to kind of think about this as you put this all together. All right, so that's kind of the simple setup. Now there are other considerations. So all you analysts out there are already coming up with all the reasons why that's not sufficient, and we agree. There's definitely more to go do that you want to pay attention to. So I'm going to cover those lightly here. We do cover them more in depth in a change analytics concentration that we do. But at this point, we just wanted to kind of highlight what's here and really get people thinking about there is a way to calculate a change ROI. So let's go do it. So some of these interactions that could be going on, there are other people that are engaged in making the initiative happen that are going to help to achieve the benefits that are going to come from humans, right? So there's probably a project manager, a program manager that's driving the whole thing, maybe a lot of them. Well, you know, they could say, well, yeah, we're contributing to that value too. And, you know, and they are. The IT folks that might be involved in implementing the CRM, they're going to be involved in all of that. So you probably need to start thinking about how do you take that into account as well. I'm going to show you a little bit about that because some of that ROI is really coming from their work. So what we would suggest is take a very global view now and see if you still end up with a totally positive change ROI. So this is what I mean by that. Now we're going to go back to the business case, and now in this value, this is everything. So this is the all-in value, every single thing that you're getting. Because now when you look at things like what's going on with what the IT folks are doing, that licensing reduction is part of what the value from their work to implement. And so we need to count that. We subtract out the cost of change management, and then we subtract out all of the other costs. So again, pretty simplistic stuff. And then we're going to look and see, do we still have a positive number? So even when we add in all of this extra cost for doing change management, do we still get a positive return for the entire project? And if we do, then great. You know, you're getting everything that you need, and now you don't need to worry about those interaction effects because you stuck it all together in one lump. So we're suggesting this kind of two-step process, one to show the specific impact to the people, and then one to show what the impact is overall. So if we go back now to the work that we had before, add up all of our numbers together, and then take out the ROI on what we've got, you know, now we can see that we still have a positive ROI for the change. So in this made up example, of course, I'm going to do it to make it look good, but you know, you want to go through and walk through those numbers to prove it out. I will say that in most of the initiatives I've seen, if adding in change management is going to turn the ROI negative, then the business value of that thing is probably not particularly high, because it's rare to see something where the change management cost is going to be a significant portion of what's going on with the overall program. And if it is, maybe you do need to look at, are you over engineering the change effort? But just in my experience, I think in our experience, that's rare. It just doesn't happen very often. All right, so now I want to get into a little bit about telling the story, and as part of that, also do just a bit of a demo, just a little technique that you can use in Excel to help out with the very final naysayers that you may get as you go through this process, and a way for you to try and take care of that. All right, so first, in terms of telling the ROI story, putting it together as a visualization is always going to be a powerful way to do it. And I think in this case, a waterfall chart is a decent way to do that. And you know, as you may already, if you've never seen a waterfall chart, as you may already intuit just by looking at this thing, the waterfall part of it is we start at one end, in this case with the full business case that we've got. And now what we're doing is we're subtracting out the costs that we have. So subtract out project management costs and technology costs, all the other costs that might be there. Subtract out the cost for change management, and now see all the way on the right, we still have a positive ROI. And so for those that are much more visual, this could be a significantly better way to take on that information. If you want to actually write in the values onto the bars, I mean, Excel will actually do that for you. You can have those values on there as well. But in terms of data visualization, this would be the way that I would suggest that you go about doing it. This is the way that I do suggest the students that I have in the business program, the MBA program at the University of Richmond, this is how I suggest that they go about displaying information that's like this, because it's very easy to pick this up. I've already talked way longer than it probably took all of you to look at it and go, yep, I got it. Because you kind of see what's there. So you just way less explanation that you have to do when you set it up in a in this kind of a format so that people can take it on. All right, and then this last thing that I wanted to walk all of you through is this idea of a sensitivity analysis. And very simply, a sensitivity analysis is just a process of taking the inputs and changing their values and just seeing what you get on the back end. And so you could do that again and again. Okay, well, instead of 70% in the case we showed, let me try 60%. Let me try 80%, and do that over and over again, which is fine, just kind of laborious, but Excel can do it for you. And so let me just show you how to go about doing that. So I'm going to hop out of the PowerPoint and then bring up an Excel example so that we can kind of walk through that and you guys can see what's going on.
And just to pause for a moment, we're getting some questions in, which is great. We're going to answer the questions at the end. Just want you to know, if you ask, we're not ignoring you, we'll get to you.
Great. All right. Thanks, Roxanne.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, good. So here we are. Just take a couple minutes to go through this and then we'll walk through your questions. This is the same example. So on the left-hand side over here, I've got reducing the license cost, better outreach, better closing of sales, same numbers. And again, I'm only adding up the second one and the third one to give the value, because right now we're going in to calculate the change ROI impact. I'm using 70%. Somebody asked about doing it as a decimal. I always do them as a decimal because you can keep it straight that way. So a percentage should always be between 0 and 1. So 70% is going to show up as 0.7. And then I'm just adding up all the costs. Right? So I have all the different costs that we had, add them all up, and then at the very bottom, come down here and we get the same number that we had before, 430,000. So that's the same exact calculation that I showed you in the PowerPoint. But what if someone comes along and says, well, what happens if the percentage success is different? Or what if they say, well, I don't believe you that all of that value, that 4.4 million, is actually attributable to people. I just don't believe that that's true. So one of the things that you can do with that is a sensitivity analysis, and Excel can help you do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in a factor that's attributable to people. So I'm going to say, well, okay, only 90% of it is attributable to people. So I'm going to put 90% over here. And that means I got to change my equation over here. So instead of just the sum of all of those, I also have to multiply it by whatever that value is. So now I've reduced my amount. I was at 4.4, now I'm at 3.96, right? So the value went down because somebody's worried about that and says, okay, well, I don't believe 100% of that is attributable to humans. So what if it was only 90%? So that number goes down, and then you can see all the way down at the bottom, the ROI number goes down. And so I could keep going in there and changing those numbers back and forth and changing those numbers, but that's tedious. So instead, what I can do is create a data table, which is a way that Excel has to help us to be able to go through the process of putting all of these things together in one spot so that we can see the change all together. So that's what I'm creating over here on the right-hand side. So what I've done now is I'm looking at the success percentage, and I'm going to examine it from 20% to 100%. So what I'm saying is that I have, I think if I just sent an email, 20% of the people would do it, all the way up to if I just sent an email, 100% of the people would do it. And then same over here, that I'm saying from 50% of the value is attributable to humans, all the way up to 100% of the value is attributable to humans. And what I want to do is I just want to see what all of those values are in here. And so I'm going to create this data table to go put that all together. So it's relatively straightforward. So in this corner here, I want to put in the value that I want to pay attention to. In that case, it's what is the ROI? So I have it go equal to, and then I just click in the cell. In this case, it's B18. That's the ROI value. And then I highlight all of this, and I'm going to go over to the data tab and see if I can pull this together. Now, right now I got a little, my Zoom thing is in front. So hang on, let me see if I can get rid of that and get that out of the way. Hang on, I'm going to have to maybe minimize my screen. I'm not sure what I'm going to do to get rid of this thing.
Oh,
hang on.
So you can maybe use here. Use that. See where cursor is. Go up. Yep, keep going up. You want to go to data. Ah, shoot.
All right, sorry. I'm going to figure this out in a second. It's going to happen. I just got to move this screen. That's over. Zoom is not helping me out right now because they are have it overlaying. Okay.
There you go.
All right. So I go to data and then over here to what if analysis and then down to data table. And so this is where the magic happens, is inside the data table. I click on data table and now it's asking me for my two inputs, the row input and the column input. All right, so this success percentage is set up as a column. So in that column input, I just put in the value that's in the equation. That's this thing right here. So I'm changing, it's as if I'm changing success percentage. So what is in B8 again and again. And then the row input, so here's the part that I have in row. This is the percentage that's attributable to people. And so that's this value here, it's in C6. So I click and put C6 in here. And when I hit OK, what Excel now does is it goes through and calculates all those values for me and puts them in a table. All right, so I'm going to make this look a little nicer. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stick little dollar signs on them. I'm going to turn this into currency so that I can see what's going on and make the negative ones red. So I ought to right there start to get a better view as to what's going on. And so not surprisingly, if we had thought about it some, if in the upper right is where I've got the most of what we're doing is attributable to people. And so the success percentage being lower is going to mean, yeah, I want more change management. So if it's mostly about humans and my chance of success without doing change management is low, well, then do change management. But this way I can now see what all those values are. So all the ones that are black, all the dark ones in here mean that you have a positive ROI. So if you're in that area, so here's the very worst one here. So if it's still 70% and with 70% success, you still have a positive ROI. When you start to get over here, which basically means, yeah, you could kick out an email and everybody will just do the thing. Well, that means that the cost that you're putting into the change effort isn't worth it. And so you wouldn't want to spend the money if people are just going to do it, whether or not you show up and do your change management work or not. And so that's a super easy way to go about getting values all the way around. And so now you can go back to that skeptical, hard-nosed analyst when he or she says, well, what happens if those numbers change? You go, okay, well, here you go. This is what they are. And, you know, again, you could have manually done that. It's just, that's laborious and kind of tedious. And I was able to do that here in just a few minutes. So I think that's a good technique that all of you can use to try and pull this together. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to go and kind of take you back and let you, we'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to pull this together and some of the other ways to use it, which I think are going to probably come up in a lot of your questions. All right, so actually, why don't you want to go through some of those now, Roxanne,
sure.
And I will figure out how to get my screen back so I can see what's going on with all of this.
Okay, so one person asked, might we also look at the cost of no adoption or limited adoption? It seems like that's what you've done.
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to accomplish here.
Right. The other question is, cost of failure can be quantitative and can also be lower reputation and employee engagement. So that was, I think, more of an answer to looking at ROI is great and can be persuasive, but some leaders make decisions based on the cost of failure versus the value of success.
Well, I think those are conceptually the same. They're just kind of taking them from opposite ends. So I do think you can do it that way, right? So if you want to say, you know, what happens if we crash instead of what happens if we're successful, then you're getting at the other end of it. In some ways, that might be a way to make the analysis a bit more robust, because you could potentially be accused of being overly positive about the way in which that you're taking it. So if you want to flip it and take the negative side of that, that would be useful. And then culturally, if that's how people think about it, then great. You know, you might as well, you should do it the way that they're thinking about it, because you'll have a much better impact as a result of that.
Let's see, from someone, I would love to hear more about how we determine success percentage.
Yeah, so I think so this does get into something that's going to be much more complicated, because there's a breakdown that you're going to have to do about how people are going to interact. And really, I would tie this back to what would be a typical stakeholder analysis for any sort of a change initiative. So you're going to start looking at the different groups of people, how much change they're actually going to have to take on, how easy or hard it is to go do that, and then start walking your way through all of that. So that is a more difficult thing to try and pull together, and will take a little bit more time to do, especially if the thing is complicated and you've got a whole bunch of different stakeholder groups that you need to take care of, and walk your way through that kind of analysis. But I would tie it back to what I think of as a typical stakeholder analysis done within a change initiative.
Okay, how do you know what percentage probability without doing some kind of change management investment/research up front, or do you recommend taking a guess and then updating?
Well, I think in a perfect world, I would get the senior executive to take the guess, because then it's not you.
Right.
You're asking them, what do you think what do you think your chances of success are, boss, if we go after this thing and we don't do any change management efforts at all? Like, how good do you feel? And let that senior leader make the call on that. Because I mean, it's great to go through and come up with a convincing argument, but in the end, you really need that person to be the one that's driving it, to pull you in. And what I would say is, if you can get that, then, you know, this idea of I have a recalcitrant leader and I can't work with them starts to go away, because they're the ones saying, hey, my thing is not going to work out unless I have you come help me go do this. And I think that's exactly where you want to be. On the other side of that, if they go, well, you know, we'll be fine, it's 100%, I don't need you, then, you know, you probably want to go somewhere else anyway, right? Because that leader doesn't want you in there, and you're going to spend your entire time wrestling with them over what's going on with the initiative. And I know that's really easy for me to say, and I don't live in your organization, and it's way more complicated than that. But it is a way to point of view to think about. And I think if you put it to them and get them thinking about what does that mean to not do that, that can be a successful way to go.
Just to add to that, and I'm sure a lot of you do this already, but I learned in my skeptical organization to think of change in terms of risk and talk to leaders about change in terms of risk. What's the risk to the initiative if you don't apply change management? What's the risk to the initiative if the people don't adopt as you intend, right? What is the outcome? And that seemed to get traction more with the analytical type than really than any other approach.
All right, maybe we'll go back and let's just kind of finish this off, and then we can come back in to answer whatever questions might still be there. All right, so we talked about the sensitivity analysis. We've been pulling I've mentioned this a couple of times already, we've been pulling all of this together into this change analytics concentration. And so what we're covering, you see, are the things that are on the right-hand side. So how to dive a little bit further into what is really the impact that the stakeholders have. This kind of gets into the question that was asked about how do you know what the percentage is? Well, some of it is you're going to have to do an analysis here around what's happening within the network of people that are involved. How do you apply surveys and then interpret them and actually do some analytics on them, combine the metrics together, and then ultimately put together a persuasive presentation that's around all of that. So this gets back to what Roxanne was talking about at the very beginning, like, why did we take this thing on in the first place?
Yeah, so Ed and I collaborated to come up with these components of this course that we do. And, you know, I was thinking about myself, what would I would have loved to have, you know, available to me, you know, even like 5 years ago. So with that in mind, if there are any other things that you can think of that you would really like to see in something like this, we would love for you to chime in and just let us know. Also, Dean asked the question, are these slides available? We don't have the slides available to you, but we do have this thing called Calculating a Change ROI. It's a guide where we've summarized the slides, and we put in the example too, because I think that's really important when you go to apply it. At least it was for me whenever I was trying to apply new tools. So if you're interested in that, we've heard from a lot of folks on the chat, but if you're interested, just let us know in chat or just send us an email. We're happy to send it to you.
Yeah, and if you have some other thoughts, so some of the things that we have heard about is like, hey, how do you analyze survey comments and, you know, actually get into text and do that, or do data visualization, or if you got some other idea, something else that ought to be in there, we'd love to have you throw that in the chat, because that would be helpful for us as we try and build this out. We're trying to make something that is really going to be valuable for people that are engaged in change work, so they can take a pretty big step up in the way in which they use analytics. All right, so that covered all the basics. I think we got other questions, and I just want to throw it open to you guys if you want to come in. I'm going to get rid of the slides here. If you just want to come off mute and ask a question, that's fine as well. I'm gonna say that we're stopping at 12:30, or I'm gonna let anybody that wants to go can go at 12:30. But Roxanne and I'll stay on if you guys got other questions or you want to chat some more, because this is good stuff and we clearly like it, so we're happy to continue it. So has anybody got any other questions? You want to come off mute and let us know what you think?
Hey, it's Amy Koseb. One thing that we've been talking a lot about with ROI is calculating value of our internal change management versus bringing in vendors or external folks, and how we can show that and tell that story really well. There's been a lot of movement around that, and that's gained a lot of traction with our leaders. And I think the better we can do that will be really helpful to bolster our internal teams and really share the value of the talent that we have in-house and how we maximize that talent.
Yeah, Amy, that's such a good point. When I told you I worked for this organization for a really long time, and 3 times I participated in establishing an internal centralized practice for the whole organization. They didn't last all 3 times, but the 3rd time we really succeeded because we cracked the nut on exactly what you're talking about, the being able to measure at the right level. Because you can go too far, even in this analytical world I lived in, there would still be some skepticism because, you know, it could look like a science experiment. So then they would find skepticism in that. So we did a lot to really learn from all of that before we established the practice internally the 3rd time, and we had some real success there. There was another reason why it fell apart the 3rd time, and it had to do with outside forces. But the reporting part, we clearly had established ourselves internally as a high value service internally. So I totally get what you're talking about. It's a big deal.
Any other questions, folks? Are there any others in the chat?
All right, we heard a lot from you, a lot from a lot of folks about the guide. We'll be sending that out after this, so thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm just putting in the chat the link. If you're interested in that change analytics concentration, you can go straight to that link and take you there, and you can get a view of what's going on. And we'll be offering it several times this year, so you can see when those are as well. Even if you just want to get a reminder about when the next one's going to be, we're happy to do that as well and have that set up on our system. All right.
Okay.
So before we close out, one last time, anything else? Other questions?
I think we might be done.
All right.
All right.
Well, everyone, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
Have a great day.
Thanks.